Welcome to the Weekend Review. I'm Dave Morris here in the Oklahoman's video studio, joined by my friends and colleagues from the newsroom of the Oklahoman. We have the business editor, Don McCoy. We have assistant sports editor, Darnell Mayberry, and investigative reporter. Watch your back around this guy. It's Ben Felder. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us here on the Weekend Review.
Thanks. Yeah, you bet.
Philip O'Connor could not be here. He is traveling the desert right now, probably trying to avoid a hurricane monsoon there. But he will be back next week, capably guiding this segment. Now, last weekend, the Sooners faced Houston. That's where I was. We'll get to some Sooner football with Darnell here in just a little bit. But perhaps the bigger news last week was another earthquake. A large earthquake hit Oklahoma. Oklahoma Governor Mary Fallin joined us in studio yesterday, and she talked about last weekend's earthquakes.
Except for a little incident on Saturday morning about 7 a.m. It kept us pretty busy on coordinating with all of our different agencies and talking to people, and certainly the earthquake that hit Oklahoma, which shocked us all to that magnitude. But thank goodness years ago we set in place a governor's seismicity council that coordinates all the researchers, the geologists, all those who are in the industry, to work together with the oil and gas industry to see what we can do to mitigate earthquakes in the state of Oklahoma with disposal wells. And we worked certainly very hard with the Corporation Commission, and they were all fast and everybody was in place and knew what to do. And so
there you have it. Governor Fallin joining us yesterday. She has an event coming up this weekend. More of that interview can be found online at newsok.com. But back to the earthquakes, Don. This is a story your team has been covering all week long. It was a 5.6 at the time. It's now been raised to a 5.8, which is a Oklahoma record.
Yeah, it's the largest earthquake in Oklahoma's recorded history, and I think it woke up a lot of people last Saturday. People felt it in several states, and it was a real strong timber. And one of the points that the governor made there was a really quick reaction. The Corporation Commission that same day set aside an area around Pawnee where the quake was centered, and said we want to shut down disposal wells that are they're pumping water down into these formations. Within a day, the EPA, which controls because of an old treaty, Osage County wells, they agreed that they would also shut down wells in that area, and we did see a quick response in that way. And over time, the Corporation Commission regulators have been shutting down wells, limiting the amount of water that the oil and gas industry can pump down into the ground. And we have seen an overall decrease in the frequency of earthquakes.
It did seem like it really did taper off, perhaps late spring over the summer.
That's right. I mean, when you look at the numbers. But we still have a vast number more of earthquakes than we did, say, 6 or 7 years ago. I mean,
no comparison.
Right. But they thought they were seeing some progress. But now we see this big earthquake. We had one here in the metro area last night at 3.8, which was pretty strong. A lot of people felt it. And what some of the geologists are telling us is like, hey, this is still a likely occurrence in Oklahoma. We're going to continue to see quakes, and because of the size of this most recent quake, which is the strongest one we've ever recorded in Oklahoma, there's an even greater possibility that we could see something even larger, something on the scale of like a 6, which is the magnitude of earthquakes is measured on a logarithmic scale, so a 6 is considerably more powerful than a 5.8. And then if something like that happened in a highly populated area, in the metro area or around Tulsa or someplace like that, we could really have a potential for some major damage and some catastrophe.
Certainly is a cause for alarm, especially the big 5.8 last weekend. Did any of you guys feel Saturday mornings or last night? I was at a grocery store last night. I didn't feel it.
Felt Saturdays. That was hard to miss. Last night we live in the central part of the city, and I think we felt it a little bit. So yeah, pretty common.
And it just so happens we had an earthquake forum or whatever earlier this week, where I'm sure that was dominating their conversation.
Yeah, it had been scheduled long before this had happened, and there was some controversy at the time. They had told reporters wanted to attend, and they accommodated that to a certain extent, but they wouldn't let anybody go into the sessions, where particularly you had people from the energy industry talking to geologists and other people that are interested in all these phenomenon, which was kind of a problem. But we did get a chance. Arden Wellmuth, our energy editor, who's been covering earthquakes for a long time, did get some good information out of that, And it remains a big concern for people, for geologists, for the Corporation Commission, for the industry itself, which had a little bit of criticism of how quickly the Corporation Commission took action. But we hear a lot of concern from just Oklahomans who are frightened and concerned about what's going on and what's causing it, and what the impact could be, and what's going to happen in the future, which no one really knows. I mean, we cannot predict earthquakes. We just know that this is a place now where we're going to have a lot of them.
All right, so more coverage can be found off the business desk. Don McCoy's crew does a fine job covering that, Corporation Commission and other related entities. I mentioned Sooner football off the top. That was another big story last weekend as the Sooners went down to Houston, ran into a very strong Houston team. Darnell Mayberry, our assistant sports editor. More Sooner football this weekend.
Yeah, hopefully the Sooners won't have as much trouble with Louisiana Monroe.
You would think it'd be a tune-up, sort of.
You would think. They're a 47-point favorite going into Saturday's game. So the only concern is if they're looking ahead to Ohio State the following week. And you would think that even with Ohio State looming, they shouldn't lose focus against Louisiana Monroe, given the fact that they just lost that heartbreaker to Houston down at NRG Stadium. And they need basically to win out and get some luck to stay in the college football playoff race if they want to get back into those rankings and be one of those top 4 teams to contending for a national title. So a lot's at stake, but some excitement around Sooner football right now with the new stadium. They've bowled in the south end zone.
What can fans expect?
Well, there's a lot of plush amenities now for fans seated in that area. And I think that's one of the biggest things that people are going to really appreciate going to the stadium. Things that they haven't really experienced before maybe on that side, and a lot of luxury items, that concessions, loge boxes, loge suites, things like that. So just things that's going to make the experience a lot better. From a player and coach standpoint, they want it to be louder. They're hoping that this bowled-in stadium creates a louder atmosphere so that they get more of a home field advantage, more of a competitive advantage for opposing teams coming in here, being able to hear.
What's capacity at these days?
About 80,000, somewhere around there.
That could get really loud, 80,000 people.
It can, but when it wasn't bowled in, it wasn't as loud. And Bob Stoops, years back, made some comments about how it wasn't as loud as some other stadiums, and they're now hoping that it is going to be louder in there.
You're looking at footage that Brooke Pryor, who has joined the staff this year, shot earlier this week when she got a one-on-one tour of Gaylord Family Memorial Stadium. That's kind of some behind-the-scenes footage there. Don, are you still a season ticket holder?
I'm not.
You're not, but will you be at the game Saturday?
I won't.
Right,
if tickets fall into my lap, I go, but I'm a Thunder season ticket holder, and it's impossible to do both.
Understood. However, you've been to many OU games. It's always a fun time.
Oh, yeah. And you know what? It was always, it's always been louder in the north end zone, which has always been bowled in, or for years has been bowled in, than the south end zone. It was always great when you had a team, an opposing team, that at the end of a quarter was in, about to score a touchdown or was in terrible field position, and they would have to go down to the north end zone, and it was always much louder down there. Plus the students sit down in the north end too.
They're just giving them the business down there.
Yes, sir.
We also have some cool 360 footage that our Greg Singleton took one of our new 360 cameras down there that you can find out on the News OK Facebook page, which is just fun to play with. It puts you right there, and you can just use your mobile device or your mouse, either one, to take a 360 view of this. You mentioned Ohio State. Uwe von Schaum, we'll remember, I think he had the game-winning kick in 1977 maybe against Ohio State. That is an interview Barry Trammell had earlier this week in this very studio with Uwe. It was good to catch up with him. Good conversation. We'll have that online at newsok.com next week, previewing next week's Ohio State game. And our Chris Castile reports that Donald Trump may be at the Ohio State game next week.
Yeah, coming for a fundraiser on the 17th.
A minimum price of $1,000 per person and a $50,000 price tag for event chairs.
I won't be at that event. Just to let you know.
But Darnell, that's a big game next week, OU versus Ohio State.
Huge game. As I mentioned, it's going to be a pivotal game to get them right back in the conversation for the college football playoff. If they lose that game, they can forget about it. If they win it, they're going to obviously have to continue to win throughout the rest of the season, and they're going to need some help. But it's going to do a lot to put them right back in the thick of it.
Last weekend was fantastic as a college football fan, right? First weekend of the college football season, it wasn't a bunch of directional schools and throwaway games. This was big-name schools going head-to-head with some upsets and some really good games.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you had Alabama. I mean, they throttled USC, but, I mean, there's marquee opponents. You had Louisiana State, LSU, going against Wisconsin. Wisconsin upset LSU. I think they were the 5th-ranked team. It was just a lot of great games in college football last week.
And as a result of that, you saw a lot of juggling, such as the Sooners losing, LSU losing, high-ranked teams that lost. So you already see perhaps those rankings could be shuffled, and we saw it last year, the Sooners against the Longhorns losing that game, made their way back to the Final Four.
And not just that, but, Texas beat Notre Dame. They upset Notre Dame. But you're seeing some other teams struggle. Clemson was the number 2 team in the nation, and they struggled against Auburn, who's not very good this year. So if the Sooners, to bring it back to the Sooners, if they get some help, this season's not over and done with. I mean, they can still contend for a national championship.
We had Sam Presti in studio earlier this week. He's the general manager of the Thunder basketball team, and I asked him, I was like, hey, were you really into college football this weekend? He goes, yeah, and typically I am. That first weekend, and then I kind of get over it, and I'm more focused on
Hey, Media Day is 2 weeks from today for the Thunder. I mean, Thunder season is right around the corner.
what trades are they going to make, Darnell?
I think they might be set.
Okay.
They have 16 guaranteed players right now on
Which
the
is
roster.
the most they can have.
They can only have 15, so they're one over.
Okay.
And they have to cut down to 15 before the start of the regular season. They can go into training camp in the preseason with as many as they like, but before the regular season, they have to get down to 15 guaranteed players. Presumably, Mitch McGary, the former first-round pick, I believe 2 years ago, is going to be the odd man out. He's facing I think a 5-game suspension for failed drug test. He hasn't been the most durable player. So he's got some issues off the court and health-wise that I think the Thunder have some red flags about. So we presume that he's going to be the odd man out. But they've got some decisions to make. I don't think they're going to make another big trade before the start of the season.
Thunder goes to Spain during part of that preseason, which will be a lot of fun for those guys. I know season ticket holder Don Mikoy is looking forward to the Thunder season getting started. Let's move over to Ben Felder right now. Charter Schools is on tap for Sunday, right?
Yeah, a story in Sunday's paper that takes a look at charter schools in Oklahoma, kind of where we've been, where we're now, and kind of what the future looks like. And we're kind of in this, kind of entering this next chapter when it comes to charter schools in Oklahoma. Charter schools are public schools here in Oklahoma. They are set up differently in the sense that instead of being managed by a larger district, each charter school has some autonomy, the ability to set their own policies and procedures. They still have to follow state guidelines when it comes to testing and some academic standards. In fact, some people will tell you that the standards for charters in Oklahoma are much higher than traditional public schools. But we've seen charters grow quite a bit in the last few years. It was 18 years ago that Oklahoma first allowed charters to set up in Tulsa and Oklahoma City. Last year, the legislature expanded that to statewide. And so now with the open door to all counties across the state, and just the turmoil that's taking place in education in general in Oklahoma right now, you're seeing more communities consider charters as an option. Since the legislature changed the laws to allow all counties to participate, we've seen efforts in Seminole and Norman and a couple other places where parents and business groups are saying, hey, maybe this is a tool we can use to maybe improve education locally.
You covered all sides of this story. Right there is Dr. Joe Pierce. He's the head of school over at John W. Rex Elementary, which is a charter school in downtown Oklahoma City. He spoke about the advantages of being downtown and perhaps the future of charter schools. But who all did you speak to on this piece that you have coming up on Sunday?
Well, we try to talk to a wide variety of people because there's a wide variety of charter schools. And of course, when you talk to people that are at the school, they'll say the number one goal is to educate children. And I think that is. But you mentioned John Rex. This is a school that's in downtown Oklahoma City. There's a larger goal there, is to provide an education opportunity to attract families to move back to the urban core. A lot of condos and apartments going up in downtown. Education is a concern that a lot of families say
Sure.
when they're thinking about moving to downtown. And John Rex is a school that right now serves grades in elementary. They'd like to expand to middle and high school. You look on the northeast side of town, predominantly black community, KIPP charter school. It has its own expansion plan. It's a middle school right now, would like to go into elementary and middle school. There's a charter school at a juvenile detention facility. There's a charter school in a native tribal land, a language immersion school. So it's just a variety of different charter schools. And I think one of the things that's unique about Oklahoma, charters is a national conversation taking place right now. But a lot of the times when we're talking about charters, you're talking about these large national organizations that come in Sometimes they're for profit, sometimes they're not for profit, but there's these national organizations that are managing charters. We only have one of those in Oklahoma, and that's KIPP. All of our other charter schools are managed locally. Now, there's one primary reason for that, and is because in Oklahoma, charters receive state aid, but they don't receive local taxes. So in Oklahoma, if you set up a charter school, you'd get about $3,000 per student. Well, that's not a lot of money compared to some other states. For example, Missouri, which has seen a lot of charter growth, especially in Kansas City and St. Louis, you get $10,000 a student. So if you're a national organization and you're looking at expansion, and Oklahoma City and Tulsa are on the radar for a lot of these groups because they're in cities of this size, you have to weigh the fact that you're going to get a fraction of what you would receive in other states. So the funding level is a concern for charter groups, and that's why it's really limited charters to these local groups. But the piece on Sunday does take a look at the fact that you have some nonprofits that are involved. The Walton Family Foundation out of Arkansas has been big supporters of charters, and they're kind of supporting some efforts here in Oklahoma. And we have some local nonprofits such as the Inasmuch Foundation that are also playing a supportive role.
The story you can find in Sunday's Oklahoman, looking at charter schools throughout Oklahoma. We have 5 or 6 interviews on the video side of things, including State Superintendent Joy Hoffmeister, who sat down with you at the Board of Education building for a lengthy interview.
Yeah, I mean, and she talked about charters and this idea that we are kind of entering this kind of new chapter. And part of our conversation was just the general climate of education right now, which is, there's a lot of turmoil. There's obviously some efforts to increase funding. There's been several cuts in recent years. Teacher pay ranks near the bottom nationally. Academic standards, I mean, there's always a way to judge those in different ways, but continue to maybe lag in some areas compared to other states. So just a lot of unknowns right now. I think there's a lot of concern across education, and that's one reason why communities are really just looking at any options and any opportunities out there that they can think of as a way to maybe improve the situation.
Very good, thank you, Ben. That's part of our coverage coming up this weekend. Don, I'll bring it back to you. What's the business desk have to offer this weekend?
Well, our Steve Lackmeyer, who's a bit of a history buff, is doing a story about a documentary that has been produced about E.W. Marland. E.W. Marland, for people who don't recall, many years ago was the governor of the state of Oklahoma. He was an oil baron. He founded the company that in later years became Conoco. He also had an interesting personal life. He was appointed the guardian of a young girl, and years after that he married her and built what is now...
That is certainly interesting.
Yeah, it is. And built the Marlin Mansion, which is still a tourist attraction in Ponca City, so this film's going to be shown locally pretty soon. And Steve's talked to the people who did it and talked and writes a lot about E.W. Marland, who's an interesting guy.
Good stuff.
Was an interesting guy.
Good stuff. Darnell, what's coming off the sports desk? Sooner football, I'm assuming.
Sooner football, Cowboys football, Oklahoma State and Dallas Cowboys. We've got Ed Godfrey efforting to get Sterling Shepard, the former OU standout and Heritage Hall standout, on the phone for a story in Sunday's Oklahoman.
Cool.
They're going to be playing the Cowboys, the Giants. Sterling Shepard is now a member of the New York Giants. They're going to be playing the Dallas Cowboys on Sunday. And Barry Trammell's actually going to be covering that game. So we're going to have some NFL coverage in Sunday's paper and Monday's paper.
I was driving back from Houston Sunday morning listening to, I think, ESPN radio, and they were talking fantasy football. People are pretty high on Sterling Shepard.
A lot of people projecting him to win Rookie of the Year. Victor Cruz, one of the New York Giants stud wide receivers, is
Kills
coming off an
Dallas
injury.
every time they play him.
Well, he's coming off an injury now, so that opens up a spot for Sterling Shepard to get more targets and Eli Manning throwing him the ball. You've got Odell Beckham Jr. on the other side, so he's got a good situation that he's facing up in New York. So I think it's going to be a good season for Sterling Shepard.
Good stuff. There you have it. All this coverage and plenty more can be found in weekend editions of the Oklahoman. Some of the video and other stories we mentioned are already online at newsok.com. Gentlemen, enjoy your weekend.
Thank you.
too.
Thanks so much for your time.